Well, good morning. My name is Mike Ryan, a volunteer with the Southern Arizona VA, working on the Veterans History Project. Today's date is Monday, August the 1st, 2016, and we're at the home of a pilot, a jet fighter pilot named Lew Daugherty, or is that the right pronunciation?
Daugherty.
Daugherty. Lew Daugherty, and was a fighter pilot in Vietnam. And so we'll just jump right in here. Lew, why don't you give me your birth date, your full name, and your birth date?
My birthday's coming up. I was born August 14th, 1930. My home is upstate New York. My dad was a dairy farmer, and born and brought up on the dairy farm, and went to ag school and got my degree.
Oh, yeah, okay. So what was life like for you, growing up and before you got in the military?
It was a busy life. I can't remember what age I was when I had to get up and help my dad milk cows, and of course there were the summer activities were strictly working on the farm, getting the hay in, and working with the cattle.
You were talking about how you really didn't like getting up at 5 o'clock every day. And so when you went in the military, you had to get up even earlier.
Normally, I was on the first mission.
Let me see.
You ask about the arm. I was 21 years old, and we had a Alice Chalmers round baler, and a neighbor wanted me to bale some hay for him. He had an orchard, and of course he had rolled all of the hay out into the middle of the aisles between the trees, humongous aisles, and I was baling with that, and it got stuck. And so I was on my leaning way over trying to clear up the roller, and it caught my arm and sucked it in. And when I reversed, it pulled all of those muscles out.
And that injury would come into play later on in your life then.
Well, yeah, when I wanted to fly airplanes, and the first physical that I took was rejected because of the scars and the injury to the arm. So when I finally passed the flying physical, it was because I had used my undershirt over my arm to hide the scars, and of course the main thing they were interested in was eyes at that physical, so I passed.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, when was it that you really thought about being a pilot?
That's interesting. As I said, my dad did all the work on the farm, field work with horses. And I was probably 14 or 15 years old. I was plowing on one blustery November day with a team of horses, old Tom and Dick. And a DC-3 flew overhead. And I thought to myself, boy, that'd be a wonderful way to make a living. Yeah. And I really pursued that Well, when I was in college, I was determined. I went into the Air Force ROTC, and my goal was to fly.
So when you went into ROTC and then you graduated, what was your degree in?
I got a bachelor's degree in agriculture.
Agriculture, okay. And then that also would come into play later.
Yes. After I got out of the Air Force, I got a master's degree in agricultural economics at the University of Arizona.
Okay, very good. Okay, so you got your wings in 1955.
Correct.
Okay, and then tell me a little bit about how that transition from college into the military.
I went to primary at Marana, and I had the best instructor, Bob Reynolds. He had flown everything, and I've often chuckled. As soon as we got off, he'd only had to fly over the Tortolita Mountains because he knew there was a nudist camp over there somewhere. But I finished primary at Marana, went to Laredo, Texas for basic, and that's where I started flying jets. The T-33 was our primary training, and when I got my wings, they kept me and two or three other graduates at Laredo as instructors. Their thoughts were that we didn't have any bad habits, and I was at Laredo for a little over 4 years, but in 1957, the requirement for anyone completing pilot training, the commitment was moved to 5 years from had been previously 2 years. And amazingly, an awful lot of the student pilots got out. They weren't ready to commit for 5 years. And my original training in the Air Force had been as a maintenance officer, and so when we ran out of students, I was transferred from instructing to maintenance, and I had T-33s, 50 T-33s that I was responsible for maintaining the flight line maintenance.
Did you enjoy that work?
Yes, I preferred flying, but of course, when I had that job with some 50 T-33s, I flew all of the test flights, and so I really got quite a lot of flying time, even when I was in the maintenance work. And subsequently, I went to Wethersfield, England, in the 20th TAC Fighter Wing as a maintenance officer, and fortunately, the squadron commander, Colonel Raymond Stewart, wanted all his pilots to be bomb commanders, including his maintenance officer. And so I got a checkout in the F-100 there in Wethersfield, England.
That's a single seat jet, isn't it?
What?
The F-100, is that a single seat?
No, well, yes. However, they have some two-seat airplanes for training primarily. Yeah. And the 20th Wing had an F-100F that Bill Gillette gave me a checkout in the F-100 there at Wethersfield.
So did you go over to see, did you see the cliffs of Dover?
I still laugh. One of the early flights with Bill, it was down over the North Sea, and I recall he asked me, have you ever seen the White Cliffs of Dover? Well, I still haven't seen them because he was flying so close to the water. I was very alert to be sure we didn't get down too close. But that was interesting.
You said you saw the water spray.
Yeah, I could see it in the mirror. I was looking back there.
Yes, but you still haven't seen the White Cliffs of Dover yet, except in the movies.
Yeah.
And then you had gunnery training? Where did you go for that?
The 20th Wing and all of the wings in USAFE had a gunnery camp at Wheelis in Tripoli, Libya. And we went down there for gunnery training. I'd never fired a gun until I went to the range, the El Watia range in Libya was the gunnery training, and we stayed at Wheelis Air Force Base.
At some point, if I recall right, you were wanting to go into to get a regular commission, and you had to go through another physical then?
Yes, I did. And I'd had several physicals going through pilot training. Primarily they're checking eyes, but nobody was interested in looking at the scars on my arm. But when I decided to try for the regular commission, I decided to come clean, and of course I knew the flight surgeon who gave me the physical, and he looked at the arm and just shook his head. But since I already had nearly 1,000 hours of flying time, he said, okay. And I've never had a problem with the arm.
Well, that was the reason he passed you anyway, because you really had no issues with it at all, and no limitations. There was a story in here about a dive bomb for nuclear delivery.
I'd never fired a gun or dropped a bomb until I checked out in the F-100, and I laughed myself. The wing had a requirement for a dive bomb nuclear delivery. And so when we went to the range, the first event was always to practice this high altitude dive bomb, and we went to 35,000 feet. I forgot to come out of afterburner when I entered the dive, and so I was supersonic when I released the practice bomb, I think. I don't know where it went.
Supersonic's not good when you're delivering bombs. Well, give me an idea of like the places that you went to and the jobs that you had, like in that period before you went to Vietnam.
Well, the first job that I had in Wethersfield, England, was maintenance officer in the 55th Squadron. The 55th is one of the 3 squadrons in the 20th Wing. And while I was there after my F-100 checkout, I primarily flew check flights, test flights for the wing airplanes. And of course I flew gunnery with the squadron. From Wethersfield, I was transferred back to TAC headquarters in Langley, Virginia as a maintenance officer, maintenance staff officer. And I was there at Langley for almost 3 years. But the Vietnam situation was coming to the forefront, and the word was out that if you volunteer for Vietnam, fly the Skyraider in Vietnam, you get your choice of assignments when you come home. So I did volunteer and went to Vietnam flying the Skyraider.
Now, what is the Skyraider?
It's A-1E. It's a single-engine attack bomber. It has a big reciprocating engine, 3350 engine, and we could carry more ordnance on the Skyraider than they could carry in a B-17 during World War II.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's a big airplane.
Okay, so you checked out on that, and then there was an issue. I think I remember reading about trying to get the tail up of the fighter.
For myself. When I was checking out at Hurlburt in the A-1, of course we didn't take off with any heavy loads, and I recall my instructor said, if you ever take off with a heavy load, it's important to lift the tail up and streamline the airplane to expedite takeoff. And one day when I was at Benoit, I had a heavy load of bombs. I can't recall what they were. But I remembered what the instructor had said, and I lifted the tail off and got airborne, flew the mission. And when I got back on the ground, the crew chief showed me the tips of the propellers. Each propeller tip, all 4 blades had tipped up when I hit the macadam, the propeller when I lifted the tail up.
Not thinking that when you lift that tail up, the nose is going to go down. Huh?
Well, I just overdid it.
Luckily, it didn't cause any trouble.
Except they had to change the prop. That's the only thing.
Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about when you were in Vietnam, the kinds of missions that you flew.
When I first got to Vietnam, we had Vietnamese pilots were students. We were checking them out in gunnery. And down near the coast in Vung Tau, there was a range. We'd take the Vietnamese pilots down there and teach them dive bombing and skip bombing and strafe. And I hadn't been to Benoit more than a month when I was tasked to take my flight to Udorn. And I chuckled because they insisted that we go south over South Vietnam and over the Indian Ocean over to Bangkok and go north over Bangkok through Thailand to Udorn. And we were at Udorn, and that's where we started what's known as the Sandy mission. Our tasks while we were there at Udorn was to go in whenever fighter pilots went down in North Vietnam. If the wingman had made contact or there was any thought that the pilot was on, we'd go down and we'd fly in and find the downed air crew. Normally, wingman would have a spot on the downed air crew, but we'd go in and then we'd have the Jolly Green helicopters come in to make the pickup and escort the helicopters back out to Thailand, and they would sit down in the northern part of Laos to refuel. But we could make it all the way back to Udon.
The Jolly Green Giant, is that the Chinook? The double-bladed?
It was a big helicopter, and I can't remember the designation.
Okay. Is the word Sandy, is that an acronym for something, or?
Well, that was the call sign. When I started flying missions in Vietnam, 7th Air Force was changing call signs about every 3 days or a week in an effort to confuse the enemy. And I think they realized finally it was confusing us more than it was confusing the enemy. And at the time that they decided to forego the switching call signs, the call sign of our squadron happened to be Sandy. And so we retained that call sign throughout the tour.
So it's more of a designated, okay, very good. Tell me a little bit about the strategy or the tactics really of like how you would go in and how with the plan for going in and rescuing somebody, especially in North Vietnam.
The wingmen normally would have spotted and would have talked to the downed air crew. We had 4 A1Es on the mission. 2 would remain over the helicopters that were down taking on fuel in Udon, and the other 2 would go in and find the downed air crew in North Vietnam, and or in Laos. Occasionally we'd find some in Laos.
Yeah.
And once we had identified and verified that the area was clean, when we could safely bring in the helicopters, we'd call, and the other 2 Sandys would escort 2 helicopters in, and if everything went well, they'd hover and make the pickup, and 4 Sandys would escort the Jolly Green helicopters back, and they needed to land and refuel, but once we got back to Laos, we'd drop them off for their fuel, and we'd go on back to home to Udon.
There was a story in there about one of the helicopter pilots saw a MiG.
We were coming out one day, and I was about a mile off the left wing of the 2 Jolly Green helicopters. We were heading southbound, and suddenly I heard the Jolly Green pilot scream MiG, and I looked. I hadn't spotted it before, but this MiG was it overshot the helicopters, went by, and of course we screamed. There'd been a lapse in top cover. The F-4s were slow coming off the tanker apparently, and so we charged the guns and were ready to go to battle, but we never saw that MiG again. And I've often laughed when the F-4s came in to find the MiG. They dropped tanks overhead, and we had fuel tanks dropping all around us as we were southbound out of North Vietnam.
How big are those fuel tanks?
It's 600-gallon tanks. They're pretty good size.
They leave a pretty good dent.
Yeah.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about this Jump Myers character. It seems like you had some experiences with him.
Yeah, when I went to Vietnam, well, Jump Myers, I got acquainted with him at Hurlburt when I was checking out in the Sky Raider, and I got acquainted with Jump Myers then. I think he was in the class ahead of me, and went to Vietnam, and early on he was assigned as the senior officer at I can't think of the name of the base up there, and but anyway, we kept a detachment, Quy Nhon. We kept a detachment of Sky Raiders all the time at Quy Nhon, and Jump Myers was the officer in charge of that detachment, and he, of course, was shot down, and Bernie Fisher got the Congressional Medal of Honor because he landed on a strip and picked up Jump Myers and got him back out.
Was that in North Vietnam?
No, I think that was South Vietnam.
South
But it was a
Vietnam.
contested fort. Khe San was the fort, and there was a strip there. And they had put 50-gallon drums along the runway in an effort to prevent anyone from landing. But as I understand it, Bernie Fisher landed and had 50-gallon drums bouncing off the landing gear while he went through. But anyway, he picked up my old buddy Jump Myers. Interesting sidelight. When Jump Myers got back to his job at Quy Nhon, he and another fella who we have nicknamed Big Daddy Billingham were in the MACV Military Assistance Vietnam Club in Quy Nhon. And apparently some nurses from Army nurses were in there, and Jump and Big Daddy Billingham were hobnobbing with the nurses, and when they were took him home, the commander of the MACV compound had seen these Air Force fighter pilots in his bar, and so he closed the compound. And when Jump and Big Daddy went out and got their scout to drive across town to the villa where we were billeted, the concertina wire was across the exit, and the sentry said, "I'm sorry, sir, you can't leave. The compound's closed." And as I recall, Jump said, "Look, we're just going to drive along the perimeter road. We're not going downtown. I'm sorry, sir." Pow! They went through the concertina wire. They had the nurses, and they started around the perimeter road. And as I understand it, the sentry caught them in a jeep, and they had two nurses and two guys spread eagled out in the hood of the car. Jump took us Article 15, I think, to avoid court-martial for that one.
Like they were talking about court-martial, and how did he get the nickname Jump? Where did that?
I don't know. I don't know. It just picked up that nickname. I suspect he jumped out of an airplane sometime, but I don't know that story.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, it seems like it was appropriately named, Is he? So tell me about your impressions of Vietnam, and then kind of your experiences all together in there.
I didn't give it a great deal of thought. We were initially at Benoit, and they were bringing F-100s into Benoit, and so they moved us to Quy Nhon, and then later we moved to Thailand, Udon, Thailand. And most of our missions in the latter part of my tour were interdiction and occasionally close air support for forts in Thailand or in the northern part of South Vietnam. And then when I came home, the whole squadron was at Udon. They moved to Nha Trang and then subsequently moved to Udon. And I understand that subsequently, after I left, the squadron moved to Nha Trang. There were two squadrons of Sky Raiders at that time.
Now, all of those, so you were flying out of Thailand, or then out of Vietnam?
Initially, we were flying out of Benoit, and then we moved north along the coast to Nha Trang, and we were flying out of Nha Trang. We had a detachment at Quy Nhon, which was a little further north. And then when we moved to Thailand, most of our missions were up in Laos. Mm-hmm. And of course, a big part of the mission at that time was retrieving or finding downed air crews in North Vietnam and covering the escort and the Jolly Greens out.
Yeah. Did you have to refuel when you were flying out of Thailand?
We didn't have to refuel. We had, we often laugh, we had a 600-gallon tank, I think, on the belly, and we'd run out of oil in the engine before we'd run out of gasoline. But the helicopters had to sit down and Air America had pre-positioned fuel for the Jolly Greens at a radar site in the northern part of Thailand, and the Jolly Green helicopters had to sit down there and get some more fuel before they could make it home.
So explain Air America.
It was a CIA organization that was nicknamed, or actually the official name, I guess, was Air America, but we all knew it was a CIA activity, and I really don't know what they were doing. I know that they had various activities in Thailand, but I really don't know what they were doing.
So did you fly up to, you say Quezon? You were up around in that Quezon area?
There was a Fort Defense of Quezon, and I don't recall that I flew missions there, but that was where Jump Myers was hit, and there was a strip there, and he put it down on the strip, and that's where Bernie Fisher landed and picked him up, and subsequently was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for that act.
Wow. So there was one day, I guess you were flying, and I'm not sure at what point in your tour where you spotted a truck at the top of a hill.
At that time, we had undertaken a mission where we were flying as forward air controllers, FACs, and bringing in F-100s and F-105s with heavy bomb loads when we find a target. And this particular mission that day, I was checking out a new pilot as flight lead, and we were over in the north part of South Vietnam, and he had several flights of fighters that he programmed or aimed at. He had Willie Pete rockets that he'd pinpoint targets with and have the 100s or 105s drop in that area. Most of the efforts that day were on karst caves in the area of Sam Nui, as I recall. But on our way in for that mission, I was on the wing, and I'd spotted this truck along the road near the peak of a hill. And so when we were on our way home, I said, "Smitty, let's get that truck." And I had 5-inch rockets that day, and he had 260-pound frag bomb. He missed on his first pass, and I went in, and I'll be darned, I couldn't hit the truck with a 5-inch rocket. I was about a truck length ahead of the. Anyway, as I came up through the scattered clouds, and Smitty was going down, and suddenly I hear, "I gotta get out, boss, I'm hit." And the cockpit's throwing the smoke, and I went down through the clouds, and I saw the airplane crash, and about that time I saw the parachute blossom pretty low, but he got out safely, and I was able to get helicopters in very quickly to pick him up. We got him out.
So all that Sandy training had helped in that case.
I think you're right, yes.
Okay, let's see here. There was an acronym in here that I didn't understand. Was SEA?
Southeast Asia.
Oh, okay. Okay, I couldn't place it here, but so tell me, after you left Vietnam then, and then you were getting ready to rotate back, is that when you had volunteered for Vietnam to get your requested
Yeah, I wanted to get my choice of assignments, and I had moved Carol and our 3 daughters to Tucson because I'd requested Davis-Monthan on my return. And I was apprehensive because I think half the Air Force was in Vietnam by the time I was due to return, and I was not sure I was going to get my choice of assignment. But I was closely acquainted with the head of pilot assignments in Randolph, personnel headquarters, and I called Dudley Foster and said, "I gotta go to Tucson, that's where the girls are." And he said, "I'll take care of you, Lou," and he did. I had a 6-month detour before I got to Tucson, Davis-Monthan. I was assigned to Armed Forces Staff College in Montgomery, Alabama, and that's a 6-month trip. No, it's not there. It's in Norfolk, Virginia, Armed Forces. It's a multi-service school.
Okay.
And then I did came back to Tucson, where we were stationed here for another 3 years.
Is that when you were trying to meet Carol up in Phoenix?
Well, it was while we were here. No, that was after I got out of the Air Force.
That was later. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we can pick up on that one in a little bit then. So when you got back, tell me how your career flowed after.
Well, I was interested because I'd lost jet qualifications, and when I checked in at Davis Mountain, the DO was just shaking his head because he wanted F4 pilots, returnees, and here I was, a Skyraider pilot. But he was tasked to train 8 RAF pilots. The RAF was getting the F4, and I was inserted into that class with the RAF pilots, and 60 days later I was an instructor in the F4. And
That's the old Phantom.
had my tour in F4s here at Davis Mountain.
Yeah. Okay. So then you did some traveling then in Europe after that?
When I left Davis Mountain, I had the best job in the world. I was a squadron commander of a F4E squadron at Torrejon, Spain. And we were stationed there. The wing was in Spain, had 3 squadrons, and you couldn't have nukes in Spain at that time, so we had to go to Insula, Turkey, to set nuke alert. And one of the 3 squadrons was in Insula, Turkey all the time.
Wow. So all the goings on in Turkey currently, then you've been there and you probably know the feeling for being in that area.
Yes, we were at Insula, is just outside Adana, and it was very peaceful when I was there.
Wow. That's a while ago, though.
Yes.
Okay. So in 71, you were promoted out of your job? What does that mean?
Yes, I had the best job. I was commander of the 307 Squadron in Torrejon, Spain, and I made 06 colonel. And they don't want anyone as a 06 as a squadron commander. I was promoted out of the best job I ever had.
Oh, I see.
And moved to USAFE headquarters in Germany, Wiesbaden, Germany, and I was assigned as I can't recall a job that I had there, but I didn't like it. And
It says War Plans Officer?
Yeah, that's right, nuclear war plans, that was it.
Okay.
And I was there about a year, and I decided to get out of the Air Force.
It wasn't, did it provide flying time or no?
Well, yes, we had to have flying time. There were T-39s at Wiesbaden, and checked out in the T-39. And primary mission, we would haul senior officers to various meetings and various bases throughout Europe.
But it wasn't the kind of flying that you wanted or the situation that you wanted?
I didn't like this desk job.
Yeah. So you retired in 1972.
Correct.
Yeah. So how did retirement treat you?
It was interesting. I didn't give it a great deal of thought. It was kind of impetuous to get out. One of the first jobs I got when I came back to Tucson was I was crop dusting in the Eloy area. I was flying the Pawnee. It's a single engine, reciprocating engine crop airplane. And I sprayed cotton for a couple of years. And then subsequently I checked out in the Cessna 402, the local airlines in Tucson, Cochise Airlines was flying the 402, and they had flights from Douglas to Tucson to Phoenix to Yuma to Las Vegas, and it was interesting. I flew as a commuter pilot flying the 402 for another 2 or 3 years, and then elected to get a master's degree in ag economics. So I enrolled at the ag economics department at the University of Arizona, and got my master's degree in ag economics. And subsequently, I was retained there in the ag economics department as a research specialist.
What did you research?
Every state is required to provide agricultural data on commodities grown in the state to the Department of Agriculture, and that I was continually conducting surveys and traveling the state to get the information I needed on cotton, wheat, vegetables that are grown here in the state, and collecting the information and forwarding it to the USDA.
With the intention of finding out what the cost of production was.
It's, I'm not sure what all the data was used for, but we provided the production and the costs of local inputs for the production process. And another job that we did at the same time is we'd put together budgets. And my predecessor at the University of Arizona Ag Economics Department had developed a primitive computer program, and we could put together budgets and calculate the costs of production for the various commodities.
Okay. Before we get off of the crop dusting, it sounded like you were operating in some pretty tight corners, and when you're flying around crop areas that are, you've got power lines going through there.
It was interesting. The gent that I flew for decided that it would be advantageous to spray cotton at night. His theory was that the chemical would envelop the cotton plant at night before the sun was up, and get better coverage insect repellent. We'd start spraying cotton about 1:32 in the morning, and the so-called flaggers would use flashlights. And of course we knew the fields, we knew where the wires were and the trees and everything else. Yeah. And we'd fly the big fields, and then at first light we could go back and go around the perimeter where the trees and fences were and cut the corners. But yeah, we'd strictly fly at night.
Oh, that's a pretty heady flying. It seems like
we had Ed Thomason, the owner, had rigged the Pawnees with lights. We had lights on the wings, on the belly, and it was interesting. The light switch was down on your left. So we'd pull out of the field and switch off the running lights and turn on the wingtip lights for make the turn, and then turn off the wingtip lights and turn on the front running lights to come back in the field. How we managed to do that without crashing, I'll never know. Continually looking down and turning light switches.
So your training was in the Air Force then was converted into
very useful.
Yeah. So okay, so you're at the University of Arizona, and as a researcher, then you actually became a professor there, did you not?
I got a master's degree, and my assignment was a research specialist. I was not a professor, but the professors didn't like to teach the freshman courses, so one of my jobs in the Ag Economics Department was to teach the introductory farm management course to typically the freshman and sophomore students.
Yeah. Did you enjoy teaching?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. That's awesome. And then at some point then you just decided to call that quits. Or are you still teaching?
No, I can't recall. I think it was 79 when I completely retired.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. But I go back and pick up a story here that when you were meeting Carol up in Phoenix.
When I came home from Vietnam, I called. Carol was living in Tucson, and I couldn't get a flight out of San Francisco to Tucson, so I called her, and she flew. She met me in Phoenix, Sky Harbor. I flew in from San Francisco, and she got on a commuter flight from Tucson to Phoenix. Well, we had to hold for over an hour because there was an airplane on the ground, the commuter airplane that Carol had traveled up to Sky Harbor on. The pilot had landed gear up, and it took him over an hour to clear the runway so we could land. And Carol tells the story that she was delayed in getting out of the airplane when they opened the door because she had left her wig case. In those days, all ladies wore wigs, and she'd left her wig case right in front of the door. But she managed to. Unfortunately, the airplane didn't catch fire.
Good, yeah. Well, you said like you'd gone through Vietnam without crashing.
Well, mishap, and she crashes when she's going to meet me at Sky Harbor. Yeah.
Interesting story. Well, looking back over your experience, like with the Air Force, especially with the Air Force and stuff, do you have a sort of a general feeling about the time that you spent in the military?
I've never given it a great deal of thought, I guess, but more recently, I have thought that we're very quick to go in and start dropping bombs, and I'm not sure that we're not premature in doing that. I know when I was active, I thought we were doing the right thing and conducting combat operations, but more recently I'm not so sure I'm that enthused about initial attacks.
Yeah. What advice would you give your grandkids about going in the military or not, or the Air Force or not?
I have given them, and my great-grandchildren, I've suggested that they follow their dreams. I wanted to fly, and I pursued it, and I don't expect most of my grandchildren to want to fly necessarily, but if they do, follow their dreams. Get enthused with whatever you're doing and pursue it.
Very cool. How about the people that you served with, as you look back over that? You mentioned Jump
Myers, yeah.
Myers is one, and some of the other names seem to become. Do you still keep in touch with some of these guys?
Unfortunately, I don't. Only one, Win DePorter, is a close friend of mine, and he and his wife live in Montgomery, Alabama, and we do keep in touch with them. And that's about the only pilot from my Vietnam days that I really am in touch with. Another pilot, Elmer Nelson, lives up in the Phoenix area, and we have gotten together. The Sky Raider Association has a reunion every other year, and we're fairly religious in attending the reunions, and that's where I have a chance to meet and hobnob with some of the fellows that I flew with.
What about the Friday pilots?
That's interesting. There were three of us, I think. Bob Barnett and Dusty Schoen and I frequently had lunch at Rick's restaurant when they were still open on the corner of Craycroft and River. And the group grew, and when Rick's closed, we moved to Hacienda del Sol, and the group has expanded nowadays. I think there's typically nearly 20 of us that gather for lunch at Hacienda del Sol. But one of the pilots that joined up with us was Don Shepard, and it was his idea to start writing our stories and publishing them in the book Friday Pilots. And each of us that regularly attended lunch have written a chapter in this book, The Friday Pilots.
But you all have this common bond of...
Interesting, I think we're all fighter pilots, except for one. We've got one tanker pilot, and he refueled us. And we've got one Navy pilot, but all the rest are fighter pilots.
Yeah, that chemistry is always there, isn't it?
You call it chemistry. Some would say it's lies, but
First liar doesn't have a chance.
that's exactly right.
So it seems like you've been able to use the pilot training, your vision of like flying and being a pilot and whatever, that you were able to translate that into, crop dusting and passenger flights and everything.
I just love airplanes and love flying. And my last flight, I believe, was flying the T-39. I was flying the general officer. I can't recall the details, but that was not very interesting flying in that T-39.
And that's when you were taxiing these people around to different locations and stuff like that.
We was going to different bases normally.
And you'd had it at that point and stuff.
Well, that's not exactly true. I should back up there. That was my last military flights, was in the T-39 in Wiesbaden, Germany. But subsequently, when I got back to Tucson, I flew the Pawnee for crop dusting and the Cessna 402 for Apache Airlines, Cochise Airlines. And the reason I really quit flying is I elected to go back to the University of Arizona, and I got a master's degree in ag economics, and I did no more flying subsequently.
Yeah, well, that was the agriculture was in your blood from your childhood.
You're right, and I particularly enjoyed the people that I work with in the ag economics department at the University of Arizona, and different fraternity.
Yeah, but a fraternity nonetheless.
Similar.
Yeah. Is there anything that we've not talked about, or some experiences that you'd like to mention?
I can't think of any. It seems like most of my military experience is amplified in the book Friday Pilots, and we pretty much stick to family activities more recently.
Are there any people that we've not talked about that you'd like to mention? That friends from the military years, or even from your childhood? I mean, have you reconnected any with those people at all? Or
no, I haven't, and it's unfortunate. I was the only fellow that of all my classmates at Cornell, I think I was the only one that went to pilot training. And so I've sort of lost touch with most of those classmates.
Yeah, because that's when you were in the ROTC program. And
Right.
Okay. Well, I don't have any more questions. If you have anything that you'd like to add, maybe.
No, I appreciate going over some of these highlights in my career.
Well, before you jump away, tell me about your experiences with the VA. I'm assuming you've had some, but I don't know that for sure. But about the care that you've been given.
The only real experience I've had is I've had to get hearing aids, and I have a so-called 10% disability, that allows me, permits me to get help from the VA hospital here in Tucson, and I got these hearing aids from the VA, and occasionally have to go out to get an adjustment or fix on the hearing aids. But, that's really my only contact with the Veterans Hospital here in Tucson.
Very good. Well, Lew, I want to thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for your service.
Well, I'm glad you and I got acquainted, Jim. We'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
Mike.
There you go. I'll answer to about anything. Very good. Well, thank you so much.
You bet. I appreciate it.